And today I will speak on the Cuban Missile Crisis. Imagine waking up one morning to learn that nuclear missiles are placed just 90 miles away from your country, and world leaders have only minutes whether to decide the day ends in peace or nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962 brought the United States and Soviet Union closer to nuclear war more than any point in history. The Cuban incident involving a Soviet nuclear missile sparked a political military crisis lasting 13 days. That is just under 2 weeks. The Cuban Missile Crisis showed that the Cold War came close to producing a nuclear disaster and altered international diplomacy. Causes for the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cold War was the result of the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union after the end of the World War II. Fidel Castro's rise to power aligned the island nation with the Soviet Union. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion, which was a failed U.S. military invasion on the Bay of Cuba. This fail heightened the fear in Cuba and the Soviet Union that a U.S. attack was possible. To protect the regime and counter U.S. missiles in Turkey, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. The 13 Days of Crisis. On October 14th, 1962, U.S. reconnaissance planes photographed missile sites under construction in Cuba. President John F. Kennedy, also known as JFK, formed the executive committee to debate possible responses. The United States announced a naval blockade, which was euphemistically termed a quarantine to prevent further missiles from reaching Cuba. At the same time, a rise in tensions in both superpowers prepared the nation for a possible nuclear conflict throughout the world. The resolution on the crisis. After various tense exchanges, the Soviet Union agreed to remove its missiles from Cuba. The United States publicly vowed to not invade Cuba. The United States had secretly agreed to withdraw its nuclear missiles from Turkey. The settlement removed the immediate threat of nuclear war. Impact on the long run. The crisis resulted in improved communications between the superpowers, such as the establishment of the nuclear hotline. It raised a greater consensus of the risk of nuclear weapons. It inspired further arms control agreements such as the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. The Cuban Missile Crisis remains a key example of crisis management in international relations. Conclusion. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the moment that defined the Cold War. This is a moment when the worlds came within a hair's breadth of nuclear destruction. The lessons learned remain influential in the present policies of global diplomacy and nuclear activity. Questions?
Carter, you mentioned that these nuclear missiles were positioned just 90 miles from the U.S. coast. What type of range did these nuclear missiles have?
I mean, these missiles could have hit anywhere between Houston to Dallas to Chicago to Atlanta to Denver and ultimately Washington and New York.
So essentially they could have struck any major city in the United States.
Yes, sir, 100%.
So when you reference New York, how far away do you think Cuba was?
So New York to Cuba is approximately 1,317 miles, which would have been a piece of cake for a nuclear missile to just bring the whole northeast coast to shambles.
Well, I'm just curious to know where did Fidel Castro get his missiles?
So Fidel Castro ultimately got his missiles from the Soviet Union and Russia.
You know how they got them to Cuba?
Well, as I stated earlier, there was a naval blockade placed by the U.S., so these missiles got here by boat,
Nice.
or else there shouldn't be a need